If I have to be in a foxhole, I want John Fetterman in there with me. I tell you what, I want John in there with me. I mean that sincerely.
5 days later.
My name is John Fetterwoman.
This is Joe Biden, the President of the United States. On September 13th, 2022, Biden held an event on the South Lawn of the White House celebrating the passage of H.R. 5376, i.e., the Inflation Reduction Act.
This bill cut costs for families, help reduce inflation at the kitchen table, because that's what they look at, how much of their monthly bills and how much do they have to pay out for their necessities. And it gave them just a little more breathing room, as my dad would say.
And as Joe Biden was quoting his dad and claiming that the Inflation Reduction Act helped reduce inflation for families, the stock market was tanking.
Big Pharma blocked Medicare from negotiating lower drug prices.
All right, I do not want to be a party crasher, but we interrupt this celebration for a hard, cold dose of reality. Stocks tanking because inflation is accelerating. The very inflation that the president said he's made great progress addressing, heralding his Inflation Reduction Act as the boon for the economy that we didn't see in a key number out earlier today.
That was Neil Cavuto referring to the Consumer Price Index. The CPI takes a look at the price of food, energy, commodities, and services. And when averaging the totality of all these items, in August, inflation rose 0.1% and 8.3% year over year. And while 0.1% might seem low, that's because gas prices have dropped significantly from their all-time record highs months prior, and that affected the overall average. Meanwhile, the cost of food, energy services, commodities, new vehicles, apparel, shelter, transportation services, and medical care commodities and services rose month over month. Yet Joe Biden claims that his so-called Inflation Reduction Act is cutting costs for families. And it's not just him, it's his spokesperson, White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre.
Look, when you look at the data, the inflation data, we're seeing more progress bringing global inflation down in the U.S. economy, as I just stated moments ago. Overall, prices have been essentially flat in our country these last 2 months.
Prices have essentially been flat over the last 2 months. That is gaslighting, although it's a very poor attempt because Americans know how much things cost. During the months of July and August, the overall price of food rose 1.9%. The price of bread rose 5%. The price of coffee rose 2.5%. Breakfast cereal rose 2%. Butter up 2.1%. Margarine up 6.5%. Sugar up 3.5%. Potatoes were up 5.8%. Eggs 7.2%. And ice cream 1.9%. So I'm going to stop there and to ask you, the viewer, does it sound like food prices are essentially flat? Of course not. But Joe Biden and his failure of an administration will not only tell you that prices are flat, but that gas prices are down, even though they're on average nearly $1 higher than they were a year ago, and that wages are up, despite the fact that they're being decimated by record high inflation. In other words, they hope that you're stupid enough to not only take their word for it, but that you're stupid enough to vote for them again.
What exactly would the Inflation Reduction Act do to reduce inflation in the short term?
So when you look at the lowering costs in particular for Americans, I think that's important when you think about how inflation has increased costs for American.
So we need to lower costs because inflation has increased costs. Yeah, no shit, Karine.
If you think about the $100, saving about $100 per year on premiums with ACA.
Wow, $8.33 a month in savings on Obamacare? You can finally afford that venti oat milk pumpkin spice latte from Starbucks you've been eyeing online. Congratulations, America.
When you think about lowering costs for our seniors, capping that at $2,000 a year instead of thousands and thousands of dollars a month.
Except that $2,000 annual cap for seniors doesn't go into effect until 2025.
Experts, economists has said themselves that this would be the Inflation Reduction Act would be beneficial to that extra $300 billion in deficit.
Yeah, none of those things will help to lower inflation in the short term, let alone the long term.
Some of the savings that you're pointing to wouldn't kick in until 2024 or 2026. So is it fair to suggest to people that somehow they're going to see some inflation reduction right now while they're hurting the most?
Well, that is actually not true.
No, it's precisely true.
Inflation Reduction Act credits and rebates available today include a 30% credit to cover the cost of installing rooftop solar, up to 10% credit to cover the cost of insulation materials and other energy efficient improvements like energy savings, windows and doors.
So Nancy Cortez asked about people who are hurting the most because of inflation, and Karine Jean-Pierre's answer was, if you buy rooftop solar, you can get tax credits. You gotta spend money to save money, I guess.
All of that is part of the broader economic plan that this president has had. You think about the bipartisan infrastructure law that's going to create jobs. You think about the Infrastructure Reduction Act that's going to create jobs. If you think about if you think about just more broadly, I think that's important when you think about how inflation has increased costs. Think about that.
Anyway, according to a new Fox poll, 78% of registered voters say that inflation has caused them financial hardship over the last 6 months. And 65% disapprove of Biden's job performance on inflation, and 62% disapprove his handling of the economy. With that said, Biden is supposed to be this empathetic figure who understands the so-called kitchen table issues that Americans face every day. However, according to his public schedule, Biden has spent 40% of his time in office away from the White House. And most of that time was spent at his homes in Wilmington and in Rehoboth Beach. You can't go on vacation every other weekend to your beach house 120 miles away and also claim that you're in touch with the plight of the American people. I'm sorry, but from an optics perspective, those two things conflict with one another. Here's Ed Lawrence from Fox Business on the matter.
You've talked about trying to get costs down. A new Gallup poll shows that 24% of Americans have spending less. They've changed their spending habits. 17% are driving less because of inflation. 17% have traveled less or canceled vacations. The president's been to his beach house 6 times. He went on vacation in North and South Carolina. Is he considering any spending cuts for the administration or for himself personally?
I'll say this. The times that the president has gone to Delaware, not including, and we were very clear that when he went to South Carolina in August and Rehoboth, he was going to go spend time with his family, which every president does. That is not unusual. That is not uncommon.
Then maybe the president should consider spending time with his family at the White House.
And the president has a right to spend time with his family, just like every other American across the country.
Oh, I didn't realize that every American across the country had the ability to use Air Force One to travel out of town anytime they please. And for the record, Joe Biden has spent more time away from the White House than Trump, Obama, and Bush at the same point during their terms.
As it relates to trips that he's made to Delaware, look, the way we see that is the president could be president anywhere. He can work from the residence, he can work from the Oval Office, he can work from Delaware.
So hang on, if the president can be the president from anywhere, then why was Karine Jean-Pierre criticizing President Trump when he flew home to Mar-a-Lago or to his golf course at Bedminster? Places, by the way, where President Trump conducted presidential business, like meeting with the Japanese Prime Minister and meeting with the President of China. I mean, the president can be president anywhere, right, Karine? Also, these numbers aren't remotely accurate, by the way, but whatever. Misinformation is only a problem when Republicans do it. And then there's Joe Biden's hypocrisy on the climate.
So much is happening that nobody can doubt. Nobody can any longer doubt that the climate crisis is real, and we're beginning to respond to it.
So how does Joe Biden confront the climate crisis, in his personal capacity? Well, immediately after his speech, Joe Biden ran off to Joint Base Andrews and jumped on Air Force One to take a 30-minute flight to Wilmington, Delaware, to vote in a primary election. And immediately after voting, he flew back to Washington, D.C. And this comes less than 2 months after The Guardian published a scathing article about celebrities who take short private flights, showing how 10 minutes of flight time averages 1 ton of CO2 emissions. And when it comes to Biden's trip to Wilmington, Air Force One emitted at least 6 tons of CO2 so that he could vote in a primary and then fly back to DC. So does that mean that The Guardian is going to write a piece criticizing Joe Biden and his doctor wife? Yeah, I won't hold my breath either. Now, I understand if Biden was flying home or going to an event or a campaign stop, but flying to Delaware to vote, which cost taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars, is completely wasteful and was entirely unnecessary. A, because Delaware has early voting, and on September 9th and 10th, the Bidens could have voted early because they were already in Wilmington. And B, the Bidens were eligible to vote by absentee, and they could have mailed in their ballots, but instead, they insisted on voting in person. But fine, whatever. I'm sure that it was for a very good reason.
Can you tell us why the president went to Wilmington yesterday to vote in the primary when he could have had an absentee ballot, or he could have voted in person, early voting, when he was there last weekend?
So every American, as you know, has a sacred and constitutional right to vote. The president exercised that right alongside other Delawareans last night. Look, as you know, the president has a very heavy schedule. He's the president of the United States. It worked out best for him to vote yesterday, to vote on Tuesday.
So if Joe Biden has such a heavy schedule, then why didn't he vote absentee and simply drop his ballot in the mail?
He thought it was important to exercise his constitutional right to vote, as I just mentioned, and set an example by showing the importance of voting.
Translation, Joe Biden wanted a photo op with an "I voted" sticker on the lapel of his suit jacket. And that sticker cost the American taxpayer hundreds of thousands of dollars and increased his carbon footprint.
I want to take the most aggressive action ever to confront the climate crisis, and that's not hyperbole, that's a fact.
No, it's clearly bullshit. Joe Biden obviously doesn't practice what he preaches. So remember, the next time Biden lectures you about your carbon footprint, you can tell him to go to hell by voting Republican in the midterms. Anyway, that's it for now. Be sure to hit that like button, check out these videos that you may have missed, and be sure that you're still subscribed to the channel. As always, I hope to see you next time. If there is next time.